Hello everyone, my name is Jake Onstott, and today I'll be discussing with you about the Great Chicago Flood of 1992. The focus of the presentation will be largely on crisis management, business continuity, and at the end of the presentation I will slightly touch on emergency management. I'll be using the Great Chicago Flood to help express these points. In my presentation, first off I'm going to discuss the details of the flood, and then I'm going to move into the organizational response of the flood. So I'm going to hone in on one organization specifically, and I'm going to discuss crisis management and business continuity within that organization. And that's going to lead into my next points of best practices within crisis management and business continuity. So at the very end, I'm going to discuss on how the flood could have been completely avoided. So, the crisis. How did the flood happen? Well, Chicago has a series of interconnecting tunnels, known as the Loop, located directly below the Chicago River. The material separating the tunnel from the river was punctured, causing a significant amount of water to rush through the hole and fill the entire tunnel system. Unfortunately, the tunnel leads to many different basements of very big time buildings within Chicago. And as you can imagine, those buildings were flooded. It is theorized that the puncture was due to the placement of a supporting pillar in the Chicago River. But whatever caused it left a car-sized hole in the tunnel system and left many businesses in a tough situation. The effects of the flood. Evacuation, 200,000 people were forced to be evacuated. And the flood also forced 30 companies to shift operations to disaster recovery centers. And those are 30 companies that actually have disaster recovery centers. Not all companies had disaster recovery centers. So, and most of all, it forced companies to take action. And that very action is what I'm here to talk to you about. So, many organizations were exposed to a great deal of risk, and all responded to the flood differently. However, CHI COR Management Corporation responded very well to the crisis, and I will be focusing on discussing their specific efforts. And for sake of ease of communication here, from here on out I'm going to refer to CHI COR Management Corporation as just CORE. So CORE's successfully responded to the flood by first developing a business impact analysis. By doing this, the analysis allowed CORE to develop the appropriate steps to keep business in function and to successfully recover from the flood. So I'm just going to kind of go over each one of these steps here that they developed. So step one highlighted evaluating the threat to personnel. So, and this is excellent because it refers to rule number 2 of crisis containment: put people first. So, even though the threat to personnel safety was considered minimal, by putting people first, it expressed best practice in conducting a proper business impact analysis and just overall good crisis management. And in step 2, activate customer support network procedures. This entailed rerouting all customer support lines to a cellular telephone network. And so maintaining this line of communication showed strong continuity of communication practices. So, and it allowed customer support teams to work in tandem with offsite facility teams. So keeping this line of communication was very big, and it allowed this company to continue in their business functions. So step 3, prepare offsite facilities. Now this was probably the biggest step in keeping business functions going. Without an offsite location with PCs, CORE wouldn't have made it through the flood successfully. So having this offsite facility was absolutely essential. And then lastly, step 4, which is extremely important, which they backed up and secured information, um, their IT systems were not damaged by the flood. So it was good that they backed it up just in preparation, and but they were not damaged. So wrapping up this slide, the business impact analysis conducted by CORE was extremely helpful, and it showed good crisis management skills. So that leads me to my next point here, conducting best practices in crisis management, which CORE did. And our textbook makes a distinction on separating the process of responding to each type of crisis. And the text implies that the overarching 1992 Chicago flood crisis has many small crises that need to be separated in order to be effectively dealt with. So, in other words, backing up information threatened by the flood is one crisis, and effectively evacuating buildings is another. So CORE did a wonderful job separating the different issues by developing different teams for different tasks. For example, developing the data center team for backing up information, developing the facilities evacuation team for evacuations. So they did a really good job of this, and um, showed really good practices in crisis management. On the other hand, business continuity practices did not go as well for CORE. So what went right here? It was great that CORE developed availability of offsite facilities in their continuity plan. It was great that they had them. However, what went wrong was that CORE seemed to fail to make these plans comprehensive. So there was communication difficulties at the offsite facilities due to the lack of up-to-date information. And best practice in this case would have involved implementing training and maintenance of the contingency plans, or the business continuity plans. So in that case, staff would have been up to date and trained, and the information would have been regularly updated, and they wouldn't have had those communication issues. But overall, they still had the facilities in place, and they figured it out. But it wasn't ideal best practice. So I want to transition into preventing the flood. So the flood could have been entirely avoided because issues of the tunnel system were known well before the Great Flood. The fact is, the city had an opportunity to fix the tunnel system before the flood, and they never took it. The city knew about the potential problems for 3 months, but they moved too slowly in improving what was known as the $10,000 contract to fix it. So rather than city lawyers paying up to $36 million in damages to settle lawsuits, the city could have just paid $10,000 to repair the tunnel and possibly prevented the entire disaster from happening. So in addition, I think the flood could have been avoided if emergency managers played a bigger role in encouraging the repair of the tunnel system. Obviously, with the tunnel located directly under a river and connecting to major businesses, emergency managers should have identified that threat and taken that threat more seriously. If the threat had been taken more seriously, the crisis, who knows, the crisis may have been avoided altogether. So I just think that's my 2 cents on emergency management there and possibly preventing the flood. So in conclusion, an organization successfully, so I kind of labeled 2 different points here. I have success versus failure and preventing the flood. So firstly, just outline my entire presentation here. In order to successfully continue normal business function, there needs to be a comprehensive business continuity plan. So plans need to be in place prior to the crisis, and they need to be regularly updated and trained on with employees. Organizational success also relies largely on effective crisis management practices and conducting an effective business impact analysis. So lastly, all threats need to be accurately assessed and considered. A weak tunnel system located directly below a river is a threat that needed to be addressed and taken very seriously. Hopefully, in the future, emergency managers can identify risks more effectively and have a stronger influence in minimizing threats, potentially preventing major disasters. That finalizes my presentation. Thank you.